Hello, welcome to Game Creation with Scirra Construct 2. In this session, we're going to take a look at Scirra's awesome Construct 2 game creation studio. And this is a free or at least inexpensive tool from Scirra.com, and what it does is create HTML5 JavaScript games in a very easy way. And not only that, but it allows you to export the games that you create to a variety of platforms, including Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, PhoneGap, a bunch of other ones out there. This is a really awesome tool. Now, there's a ton of great tutorials on how to use Construct 2 up on Scirra's website, and lots of examples are also included just as you install the tool itself. But I definitely recommend that if you're brand new to Construct 2, you jump up to their tutorials on their site and at least go through that beginner's guide to Construct 2. It'll likely get you hooked. Now, Construct 2 actually has a ton of different kinds of objects and behaviors and things like that that you can add into your games. And I'm not going to take the time to talk about all of them in this quick video. But since this session is in the Windows 8 App Factor series, I wanted to at least address the Windows 8 object in Construct 2. This is an object that you can add to your game to give it support for things like Windows 8 roaming data, a test mode to test your trial mode and manage whether or not the user has a license purchased, to provide functionality for the about, support, and privacy settings and the settings charm, as well as to help you work with snapped, filled, and full view states inside your applications. Now, in addition to the Windows 8 object, if you're going to be publishing your games through Windows 8, you're also going to likely want to make sure to add in the touch object. And the touch object gives your game support for touchscreen devices, including multi-touch and more. And it kind of wraps up the mouse functionality, so you typically don't need to use the mouse object if you have touch object for your Windows 8 games. The other cool thing is that in addition to touch, the touch object actually also supports the accelerometer and gives you accelerometer values inside your Windows 8 games. Once you do have your Construct 2 game created inside the Construct 2 designer, you're going to have to export it out to a Visual Studio project that you can then open up in Visual Studio and then complete the deployment process with. So in Construct 2, once your game is ready, up along the top, there's this home ribbon. You're going to want to export your project. And then from there, make sure to pick Windows 8 as the target of your export. You'll pick a directory for where your Windows 8 game is going to go, and then hit the export button out there. Once you've got that exported, you want to open your project up in Visual Studio. And the one thing that you're going to have to fix to be able to run your HTML5 Windows 8 app is the package.appx manifest. And that's because when Construct 2 produces the project, it doesn't include a valid certificate file. And so you'll need to open up the package.appx manifest, switch over to the packaging tab, and click on the choose certificate button. And then from there, just create a test certificate that can be used for you to debug your app on the device. When you create the test certificate, you can just accept the default name and passwords. That's fine. It's just a test certificate. And then finally, you can debug your game. You can do it either locally or in the simulator. And the simulator is great because it would let you, simulate touch and rotation and that kind of stuff as well. It's also a great way to test snap view if your current machine doesn't support 1366 by 768 resolution at a minimum. If you do find that you have problems in your game, you're going to have to go back to the Construct 2 studio, fix the problems that you have, and then go back through that export process, recreating the Visual Studio project, reassigning a test certificate to it, and then debugging it again from within Visual Studio. So it gets a little bit tedious if you have a lot of debugging to do, but you can get through it, and when you're done, you end up with this great Windows 8 game. There's a lot of great resources out there about Construct 2. Of course, Scirra.com's own website has Construct 2 itself, as well as tutorials and forums. There's another series going on from our team called 0260.info that has great Construct 2 game video presentations. My teammate Jeremy Foster has a great page of just media and various resources that you can use within your games. That's at codefoster.com media. If you want to look at creating your own graphics using a vector tool like Inkscape or something, Chris Hildebrandt has this great blog called 2D Game Art for Programmers that has tons of awesome tutorials on creating your own vector-based game characters. And there's links off to free tools there like Inkscape, GIMP, and Audacity. So let's do a demo here of creating a Windows 8 game with Construct 2. Before I start the demo, I would like to mention that all the slides and demo files for this session are available up on the Windows 8 appfactor.com website. You can follow the link to the content and scroll down within there to find the game creation with Scirra Construct 2, and there's a download link for the slides and demos. And when this video is done, I'll post it up there as well. I've already got those resources downloaded, so they're on my machine here in this folder called C2. And within there you can see I've got a demos and the slides folder. The slides has a copy of the slides, including a PDF version. And the demos has any before files. In this case, there's a before file for the second half of the demo if you need it. And the after folder contains the completed versions of the game at various phases through the demo. The assets folder contains this snippets file, which has a set of instructions and things like that that you can use to step-by-step go through the demo, as well as the images folder that has various graphical assets, including their source files. So if you want to see how they were made, you can grab them from there as well. All right. So with that said, I'm going to move this snippet file off to my other screen, so I've got that handy here for me. And the first thing I want to show you is where you can go get Construct 2 from. So I'm going to open up my browser here and go to Scirra.com. And so Scirra is the company that creates Construct 2. And right here on the home page, there's lots of great information, but notice there's this big download link, and you can grab it from there. You can also scroll down to the bottom and get the latest beta release if you want. So the download link above gets you the latest stable release. If you'd like the latest beta release, you can grab that down here as well. And they come out with beta releases frequently, sometimes more than a couple a week. Sometimes a little sparser, but they're very actively working on this product, so it's great, great to see. Anyhow, so I've already got Scirra downloaded, but I also wanted to show you the tutorials that are up here. And I mentioned in the slides that I'd recommend that you come back up here and go through the beginner's guide to Construct 2. And that's this resource right here. It's a great tutorial on creating a top-down shooter. And there's also a great forum where you can ask questions or help other people out if you're so inclined. So I've already downloaded and installed Construct 2. So I'm going to go to my Start menu here and just start typing Construct 2, and there it is. And this little sort of drop down over here is really the File menu. But if I go down here and say New, I can see that there's a bunch of templates that I can choose from. And in fact, a ton of them are even demo games or examples of various features and types of games that you can create. So a very rich set of resources for you to be able to go through there. The very top one, though, is this new empty project. And that's the one that I'm going to use. Notice there is, in fact, a new Windows 8 project. And that just has the Windows 8 object that I mentioned back in the slides already added, and a few things in place, but we're going to kind of rebuild some of that by hand here. But I'm going to create a new empty project and just say open. You'll notice that there's a variety of windows open on the screen. Over here on the left-hand side is the Properties bar, as Construct 2 calls it. I've got the Projects bar, which has both the project structure as well as the Layers tab that I can get to from within there. The Objects bar shows me all the objects in the application. And in the center here then is the Design surface, and I can see the various layouts and event sheets here as tabbed documents. If one of the bars that you're trying to look for or panels that you're looking for isn't visible, you can go to the View menu, and there's checkboxes up here that you can use to turn those on. So I'm going to make sure that everything except Z order and configurations are turned on, and that's the current state. So I'm good to go there. Over here in the Projects bar, if you're a Visual Studio developer, this should look pretty familiar to you. It looks kind of like the Solution Explorer window in Visual Studio. And I can see I've got this new project over here. And the properties for that project are actually over here in the Properties bar. So I want to set a few of the properties here. We're going to build what's called a platformer game. So this is kind of like Super Mario, or where you have a player that runs around and jumps up and down between different platforms to try and get to their goal. So I'm going to create this game. We're going to call it Platformer 8. And in order to export to Windows 8, your project must have an author and a description. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in right now. I'll put my name in. And the goal of this game is I have this little character, which is an 8. And we're going to try and have our 8 character jump around on platforms until he gets to the Microsoft Surface and puts Windows 8 on the Surface. So my description here is going to be to help 8 get to the Microsoft Surface. Cool, so there's my description. All right. Now, the one other thing is that Windows 8 can actually run on a variety of different screen resolutions, but the typical sort of aspect ratio of a widescreen display is this common 1366 by 768 widescreen 16 by 9 resolution. But if you happen to be running on a device that's larger than that or smaller than that, we want to make sure that Construct 2 can scale it up. And so there's this full screen in browser property, and I'm going to change that to letterbox scale, and that'll let it maintain its aspect ratio but scale up to fill the screen. If there's any extra padding on the top or bottom or left or right, they'll just have some black boxes on the edges there. All right, so there's all of my project properties, and I want to go ahead and save this project up now. Now, when you save a project in Construct 2, you can actually save it a couple of different ways. You can save it as a single file, or actually back over here, let me do this, file save as. I can save it as a single file, which is a single .capx file, which is really just a zip file with all the project's contents in it. Or you can save it as an expanded folder with all the contents just sitting in the folder here. And so you'll notice that when I hit save, it actually wants to make this capx folder for me. I'm going to browse out to my demo folder that I have here, C2 demos before, and we're going to just call this platformer 8.capx, and hit save. So I'll mention as a side note here, Construct 2 is an awesome tool, but it does change rapidly, especially if you're running the beta version. You may find that sometimes it'll crash. And so just make sure that as you're going through creating your game, you're saving frequently up there. And you'll notice that if I jump up here, save is grayed out, but I can do Control S in the future from the keyboard just to quickly save my game. And so highly recommend that you save as often as you can. So we talked about the window size over here. It's going to try and, scale up to fill this widescreen aspect ratio and letterbox if it can't. But over here then I have this idea of a layout. And so the window is the visible portion of your game, but the layout is the actual design surface, and that could be bigger than the window itself. In my case, though, I want to actually have it be the same size as my window. But before I do that, I want to come in here and right-click on this guy, just called Layout 1. I'm going to rename it. We'll call this my game layout. And layouts are kind of like the different screens in a game, right? You might have a leaderboard layout, you might have a game over layout, maybe an options layout or settings layout or something like that. Basically, if you have a completely different visual appearance and a different set of actions, you probably want to have a different layout for that. Now, the events are the way that we control what happens on a layout. And so this event sheet is associated with this layout. In fact, over here, I can see that game layout's event sheet is event sheet 1. And I'm going to go ahead and rename the event sheet as well. We'll just call it the game events. Now, on the layout tab, or with the layout selected, I should say, I'm going to grab its size. And notice right now it's 1280 by 1024. In fact, I'm going to hold down the control key and use the mouse wheel to zoom out on this design surface here a little bit. And you should be able to see this dashed gray line. That's the 1366 by 768 window size that we set earlier. The 1280 by 1024 white box is the layout that we're looking at. We can see they don't exactly match right now, and I want to fix that. I want the layout to be the same size as the window. You don't have to do that. You can have layouts bigger than the window. Just for my demo, that's going to be the way that I do it. And then I want to start setting up the visual appearance of the game. And the first thing I'd like to do is have a background, but then in front of the background I want to have my platforms, and then the player's going to jump around on those, etc. And so there's this sort of idea of things being in front of things or behind things. And one way that we can manage that in our games is with layers. So I've got over here, I switched to the layers tab, and I see that currently on this layout there's only a single layer. I'm going to right click on this and rename it to background. And then I want to come over here into the layout, right click, and insert a new object. Now, objects are the things that we add into our game that affect what the game is, right? And so here we can have different sprites. These are graphical characters in your games. You can just have graphical backgrounds. And in fact, right now, that's what I want. It's just a tiled background. The tiled means that if the size is bigger than the image, it'll just repeat the image to fill the size up. And I'm just going to call this thing background image and say insert. Now it wants to know where I want to place this. And so I've got this crosshair cursor. I'm going to go ahead and just position it as close to the top left corner as I can, but I'll fix it later so I don't have to be exact. And now I open up the image editor for my background image. And I could actually use the tools in here to paint my own background and set the size of the image or whatever as I wanted to. But I actually already have a pre-made background. So I'm going to click the open folder there and just make sure we know where that was. That was this second icon to load an image from a file. And I'll browse out to the demos folder, assets. Remember this images directory out there, and I've already got a background.jpg. And I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to ignore this warning about the power of 2 sizing. It's the size I want, so I'm good. Then I'm just going to close the image editor. And now I can see this background sitting out here. It's actually a background image from one of the Surface type covers there, or touch covers. But I'm going to fix the position of it. I want it to be at 0, 0 on the layout. And the size, I'm going to have it fill up the layout, 1366 by 768. Pretty cool. All right, so there's my background. And now I don't want anything else on my background. So back over on that Layers tab, I can lock this background layer. And that's going to prevent me from being able to grab the background and accidentally move it or something like that. So now I need a new layer for the game objects themselves. And I'm going to rename this layer, and we'll just call it Game. And I want to make sure that that's the layer that's currently selected. Notice also that layers have numbers. Background is layer 0, game is layer 1. And we continue up the stack there starting at 0. The next thing I need to do is start adding in the blocks that are going to make up the platforms in my platformer game. So I'm going to right click out here, insert a new object, and this is going to be another tiled background. I'm not actually going to move blocks around or deal with health or anything like that, so it's okay if they're relatively just static images here. I'm going to pick tiled background, and these are going to be my ground blocks, so I'll just call them ground block. And say insert. And then again, I can click pretty much anywhere here to open up the image editor, and I'm going to go open up from my assets this ground block image and just close this out. Now this is actually a repeating image, right? So you can see this ground block kind of getting repeated over and over here. I want this to basically be a little 64 pixel wide, or sorry, high block that spans the width of my window here. So the size is going to be 1366 by 64. And then the actual position for it, we'll have it 0 along the X and then 704 down along the Y. And so that kind of puts that right there along the bottom of my screen there. Now this is going to be the ground that my platformer runs around on. And so ground, of course, is solid. That keeps the player from falling through it. And the way that I can indicate that the ground is solid here in Construct 2 is using behaviors. So I've got this ground block selected. Over here I've got behaviors in the properties window for the ground block, and I'm just going to click the behaviors link. In the behaviors window, I'm going to hit the plus button, and notice there's a ton of different behaviors that are available. And these are ways that we can make the things in our game behave differently without having to write code. For me, I just want the solid behavior on this ground block. So I'm going to pick that and hit add. And there's no other behaviors I want to add in right now, so I'll just close that dialog out. Pretty cool. And now we need our player. So I'm going to right click out here and insert yet another new object, and this time I'm going to choose a sprite. So sprites tend to have a little more oomph to them than just a tiled background, right? They can have different animations. They can have animations that run at different speeds. They can have movement behaviors associated with them, and they move around the screen and track health and yada yada. These are the game characters themselves. So I'm going to call this guy that I import here just player. And again, I'll click somewhere out here and go open up my player image, and it's this little happy face number 8 here, and I'll close that image editor up. Now this guy isn't animated. He actually doesn't have any animations, but he could very well have that, and I'll just kind of float him up here above the ground, and because he's a platformer, he's going to fall to the ground. So when I start this, we'll see him fall down, but I need to give him that platformer behavior. So just like we did on our ground block, I'm going to come to the properties window for my player, click on the behaviors link, and inside there I'll add in the platform behavior. Really cool. And that's all. Save that up. And I want to make sure to save. I haven't saved in a bit here. So there we go. And at this point I could actually go play my game, although it'll be pretty boring. But in the Construct 2 title bar up here, you notice I've got this run layout. So I'll click on that. And there's my guy. He might have noticed him fall to the screen. Notice also that this is running in the browser. Construct 2 sort of creates its own little web server and hosts it from there. But now, because this guy's a platformer, it already knows to respond to the left and right mouse keyboard buttons, as well as to the up arrow to jump. Right? So here it is. This is my little guy running around, etc. So I'm going to close this, and we'll return back to Construct 2. And in fact, with this guy selected, if I went into the properties window, notice that there are some characteristics of the platform behavior, like how fast does it move and how well is it affected by gravity, etc. I'm leaving them all at the defaults though. So to make this game a little more interesting, I need some platforms. Now we already have one. It's the ground. I really just want more copies of that thing. So in Construct 2, you can do that. Objects really define a type, and you can have multiple instances of that type out there. So in fact, I could go to my objects bar and just click on ground block and drag another one out. Notice it has the same size as the original one out there, but it's another copy of it. And I can change its size. So in fact, I'm going to make this guy be just 256 pixels wide by 64 tall. And then I can drag him around and sort of position him. I'll maybe put them here. And now I can make other copies. I could right click and copy, then paste. I could drag other instances from the object bar, or an even easier way to do that is to just hold down the control key and drag to make another copy of one of these guys. So that's really cool. I'm going to make a couple of platforms here. There you go. Let's see if that's if that'll work, right? So I've just positioned some of them out there in a way that they kind of have to go a certain path to get up to this top one. Let me go ahead and run the layout. Oh, it popped up on another screen here. You pull that over. There we go. And let's move this guy around. And I'm just moving left and right and hitting that arrow to jump. Oh, just made it. All right, cool. Looks like that's going to work. That's actually not a bad little set of layout platforms there. All right, so we'll close this, and I see that it works. I could repeat the process, repositioning my blocks and all that kind of stuff until I had a game that sort of played the way that I wanted it to. But right now, there's really no goal to the game. And remember, my description was that I wanted to help 8 get to the Surface, the Microsoft Surface. So back over in my Assets folder, in Images, you'll notice that I actually have 2 copies of a Surface. I have a Microsoft Surface that's empty, and I have one that has Windows 8 running on it there. And I actually want to add both of those as different frames in an animation for the same sprite. And there's a really easy way to do that. I can just control-click on them, and then just drag them onto the design surface. And it will create a new sprite named after the first file, but that has an animation with the frames of every file. Cool. So I can minimize this, and notice it named it Surface Empty. I'm just going to rename it Surface. And if I right click on this and go to Edit Animations, that brings me into the image editor for it. And down here I can see there's this animations panel. There's only one animation. It's the default animation. But in that animation I can see that there's in fact 2 frames, and I can switch back and forth between them. Now with the default animation selected, I don't actually want to automatically flip between those frames. I want to decide when that's going to happen. By default, the animation wants to play 5 frames a second and repeat 1 time. So I don't want that to happen. I'm going to change the speed to 0, and I'm going to change the repeat count to 0. And this is kind of weird because I have this image editor open. I had to go to the animations panel to pick the animation and then go back to the properties window and Construct 2 back behind it. So it feels a little funky, but that's really how that works. All right, so I've got that all, and I'm going to close up my edit image, and let's position this guy right up on the very top of this hardest to reach platform. Maybe move him down a little bit. I've got him selected. I'm hitting Control arrow to just move him slightly. You can hit up and down arrows to move him bigger. Control arrows give me a finer movement. And there you go. So we're getting close. I've got some platforms, I've got my player, I've got the target or the goal that I want my player to get to. When they do actually reach The surface, though, I want to reward them a couple of ways. One, I want to show them windows getting installed on the surface just by flipping to that second frame in the animation. And then I also want to give them a big "you win" graphic, that maybe they can tap on to start the game over again. But if it's a big "you win" graphic and it takes up the whole screen, I don't really want it sitting here on this layer. I want it on another layer so I can hide it when I want to. So I'm going to add yet another layer, and this is going to be my game over layer. And with that selected, I'm going to right click out here, insert yet another new object. This will be a sprite called "you win." And we'll click out here and browse out to find the "you win" graphic. And there it is. Just close that up. And there's some handy layout tools in here. I'm going to right click on the image and say align, window, and center it horizontally on the window. And again, right click, align, window, and center it vertically. And that will just position it right in the middle of the screen for me. Really cool. But now you can see that this layer is hiding all the stuff behind it. I can easily just right click on this and say visible, and it'll hide that layer in the design surface, but not necessarily at runtime. To make sure that it's hidden at runtime, I want to make sure the layer is selected over here, and then in the properties for the layer, I'm going to set the initial visibility to invisible. So now at runtime this won't show up. For design though, I am going to go ahead and hide it now. Cool. All right, so we've got that. And if I were to play the game now, I see that I can get my 8 up to that hardest to reach platform, but it doesn't know that it's reached the surface, or I haven't told it what to do when it reaches the surface. I created that big "you win" graphic, but I've now got to tell it when to show the graphic and what to do to the surface, etc., and when all that should occur. So let's close this up again. And here's where we start getting into events. Events are where we start to create our own custom logic. Notice with behaviors, solid and platform, etc., we got the basic functionality of the things within the game, but the game events are where you add the unique logic of your game itself to differentiate from other games out there. So there's really a couple of different events that I need to implement. One, I need to know when the player collides with the surface up there. And when that happens, I want to tell the surface to switch to the second frame in its animation, as well as to show that game over layer with the big "you win" box in it. Then the other set of events there is that when the "you win" box is being shown, if you actually tap on it, then I need it to hide that and then go away and start the game over again. So let's set up the first events. I'm going to come in here, add event, and I wanted to know when the player, so I'm going to click on player, and then down here I see collisions has a collision with another object. So on collision with another object, and then click next, and specifically with the surface object. Say OK. So that's my event. This is when I want something to happen. When the 8 player collides with the surface, I want to do something. And so actions are what we do in an event. And I can click on add action. And what I want to do is say, hey, surface, set your frame to 1. Frame number start at 0. So set your frame to number 1. That was that second frame in the animation, which is the surface filled in. And then the other thing I want to do is to turn this layer's visibility on. That's actually a system action. So in action, I'm going to say, hey, system, please go set the layer visible property on layer number 2. Layer 2 up there is the game over layer. So I'll pick 2 and make it visible. Cool. Let's try it. We'll run the game, get up to our goal. Hopefully I can make it. And there it is. Notice that the surface got filled in with the Windows operating system. So 8 put surface on the 8 on the surface, and there's the "you win" graphic. Now the graphic suggests I should be able to tap to play again, and right now that's not responding. So we need to wire an event up for that. I also notice something I forgot. Notice that 8 falls behind the surface. When he's moving up there, he disappears behind the surface, and I want it to be the other way around. So let's close this out, and first let's fix that ordering. I want the surface to be behind player number 8. And I can do that just by going to the surface, right-clicking, and setting its Z order. The Z order is, how deep into the screen or how far out of the screen this thing is. And I'm going to send it to the bottom of the layer. So it should be behind the number 8. We'll see that later on. So the other event I want to listen to has to do with whether or not you tapped or clicked on the you win graphic. My problem is I don't really have any way to listen to click events or anything like that. And the way that we listen to taps and clicks is with another set of objects. So I'm going to right click out here and say insert new object. And notice that I could listen for keyboard, mouse, touch, or even gamepad operations out here. I simply am going to implement touch because it kind of wraps up the basic mouse functionality for me. I'm just going to call the object touch. That's fine. Didn't need to click in there. Say insert. And now back over in game events, when I add an event, touch is available to listen to. And I'm going to say, hey, when touch is touching an object, and specifically that you win graphic, there's my event. That means you've tapped on the you win graphic. And here's what I want to do. So first of all, I want to go hide that original, or the game over layer, I should say. So set layer visible, layer 2 again, but this time back to invisible. So that'll toggle that game over layer back off. And I simply want to tell the system to restart the layout. And that'll start it all over again. Super easy, right? And let's go try it out. Bing, we won. Cool. Notice the 8 is now in front of the surface, so that's working good. And I actually don't have a touch device, so even though I said listen to touch, I can click and the game over layer disappears, the layer restarts, the surface goes back to its frame 0, which it should be at the beginning of the layout, and we're all happy here. Great, so I've got this game I can play over and over again. Really cool. So at this point, we've created, admittedly, a pretty basic but functional Construct2 game. The other part of this then would be to get it ready to export to Windows 8. So back over on my game layout, I'm going to right click and insert yet another new object, and this time it's going to be the Windows 8 object. I'll insert that, and that Windows 8 object is going to give me special functionality for implementing a test mode, which in fact I don't want, so I'm going to turn that off. But also having about, support, and privacy settings. These are actually going to end up as HTML pages that I can customize in my Visual Studio project. So that's pretty cool. And I'm going to use this Windows 8 object to find out if the user has put the game over into Snap View, because it's a pretty small window in Snap View, and maybe I decide, you know what, my game's not functional in that case. So I just want to pause the game. So a couple of things here. First of all, I need an image that I can show. So in the layers, I'm going to add yet one more layer. We'll rename this guy to game paused. And I'm going to insert a new image onto that, Sprite. We'll call it the pause object. And hit insert. And I'll just click and then go browse out and find the paused graphic that I have, which just like the you win one, except it says paused and unsnap the game to continue. Just like I did before though, I'll center this guy in the window. Sorry, align. Vertical, there we go. And I can again temporarily hide this if I don't want to have to view it here in the design surface. Oh, and one other thing, I do want to take this game paused and set its initial visibility to invisible, so that layer doesn't show up at runtime, regardless of its visibility in the designer. And now I just need to add some new game events, but when I add event in, notice now I can listen to Windows 8 specific events. And what I want to do is compare the current view state and see if it is snapped. And if that's the case, at that point I want to go, say, system, set the layer visible on layer 3, which is the game paused layer, to visible. That'll show the paused layer with the paused image. I then also want to actually pause the game. Now games are loops, right? And there's really this sort of timer that's running in the background that manages, the execution of this game loop. And I can basically stop the game loop by changing my timer or the scale of the timer down to 0. And that's a system action. So I'm going to grab system, scroll all the way down, set time scale. And I'm going to set the time scale down to 0. It even tells me that is 0 equals pause. So we'll do that. Now, if you're not snapped, so in other words, if you're anything but snapped or otherwise or else, and so I can actually implement by clicking on this event. Notice I put my mouse to the very left-hand side of the Windows object, and I'm clicking, and it grabs the entire event up here. I can then right-click on that and say Add an Else. And so if you're not snapped, this branch will run, and we're going to reverse these actions. We'll set layer 3's visible to invisible. We don't want to see the paused if you're in full filled or portrait view. And we want to set the time scale back up to normal, which is 1.0. Looks good. All right, so I could actually run it here, but because I'm not in Windows 8, we don't have snapped, filled, or view state, or full view states here. So I actually have to get this out to Windows 8 to see that function. So to export to Windows 8, I'm going to go to my home folder, or home ribbon, I should say. And along the top here is Export Project. I can pick the Windows 8 target and hit Next. And it wants to know where is it going to create this. I'm going to go out to the demo folder that I have running here on the computer. C2 demos before. And we'll call it Platformer 8 Win 8. And that's going to be where I export this project to. Images and media will go into these subfolders. It's going to use standard compression on the PNGs. And I actually don't want this to minify the script. Minification compresses the script down so it's smaller, and that's great, especially if you're downloading this game off the web. But we're going to be installing these on Windows, so the initial download is, we only do it once, so the size isn't as important. Also, it requires that you have the Java runtime installed. And so I'm just going to clear that and say export. All right, and when it's done, I'm going to go open the destination folder where it exported the project to, and notice that I've got this platformer8.sln solution file. So I'll double click on that to open up Visual Studio. And this is a Visual Studio Windows Store HTML5 CS, HTML5 JS, pardon me, project. In fact, notice here's this C2 runtime that actually has the source code for the Construct2 stuff in it. We've got index.html, which somewhere down here has the canvas that the game is going to be drawn on, etc. So it's just an HTML5 game. However, in order for me to run this, I have to fix one problem, and that's over here in the package.fx manifest. I need to basically sign my package. So I'm going to flip off to the packaging tab, choose certificate, and then from this drop down, pick create test certificate, and I'll just accept the default name and password and OK out. Now that I've done that, I can actually debug my application here. So let's save this up and run it in the local machine. And so I see my game running. This all should work. Notice that it's actually a Windows 8 game now. This is not running in the browser as it was before. It all works just like it did. And I could actually try and test this in the simulator. So let's go ahead and close this down. Back over in Visual Studio, we'll change the debug target to the simulator and run it in the simulator. Okay, now it's running in the simulator, and what I wanted to show you here is that yes, it works, but I can now take this and drag it and snap it, and remember that snapped view should show the pause. If I pulled something else up over here and instead changed to fill view, the game goes back to working. Or even if I were to go back to full view, we're functioning again. Pretty cool. So hopefully that gives you an idea then of how you can use Construct2 to create Windows 8 games that you could publish into the store and hopefully even make money on.